36 years ago, a young woman vanished without a trace after an anniversary dinner with her husband, leaving behind her car still running with its headlights piercing through the thick fog. Authorities at the time believed they were victims of a robbery, but with no witnesses, no body, and scant clues, the case quickly went cold. However, through all those years, one grizzled detective never gave up, keeping a copy of the file, convinced that behind the robbery story lay something much darker. Then one day, when modern DNA technology was applied, a seemingly insignificant detail in a bloodstained woolen scarf changed the entire case and shocked the entire Hudson Valley community in ways no one could have imagined. Before we dive into this shocking story, let us know where you're watching from, and if you love cold cases like this, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next video. The winter night of 1975 draped the small town of Poughkeepsie in a cold gray. Snow flurried lightly over iced rooftops, wind from the Hudson River blew in stinging cold, carrying misty dampness that enveloped the riverside streets. In the red brick house on Main Street, Elaine Porter, 27 years old, wrapped her cream-colored woolen scarf, a keepsake from her mother, and smiled as her husband Richard Porter stepped into the living room. He was wearing a gray wool coat, smoothing his neatly combed hair, and said, "It's cold out there, honey. Put on another layer." Elaine nodded, locked the door, and stepped out to the car with her husband. Today was their third wedding anniversary, and they planned to have dinner at a riverside restaurant, the place where they had dated when they first met. The blue Ford turned into the thick fog along the snow-covered road, its taillights fading gradually into the darkness. At Hudson Grill restaurant, warmth spread throughout the room. The waiter remembered the young couple very clearly, the wife with a gentle smile, always adjusting her scarf, the husband speaking softly and politely, ordering red wine and grilled salmon. No arguments, no unusual behavior that drew anyone's attention. Around 9 o'clock, they left the table, paid the bill, thanked with a nod, and stepped outside. The door opened, cold wind rushed in, the car's headlights swept across the window one last time. After that, no one saw them again. The next morning, snow blanketed the Porters' backyard. The clock struck 7, but Elaine didn't call her aunt, as was her daily habit. Patricia Marsh, her aunt, and the only close family member left nearby, brewed a cup of coffee and looked out the window, thinking her niece was probably sleeping in. By noon, when Vassar Hospital reported Elaine hadn't shown up for her shift, a bad feeling stirred. Patricia tried calling Richard. The line was busy, then silent. She dialed repeatedly all afternoon, but no one picked up. Outside, snow began falling again, wind howling through the cracks. Around 5 in the afternoon, Patricia drove to the couple's house. The door was locked, no lights inside. On the porch, the snow layer was undisturbed, no fresh footprints. Neighbors said they saw Richard in Elaine's car leave the night before, but no one saw them return. The fear grew with each moment, enveloping every thought. Elaine was careful, never staying out overnight without letting someone know. She had no reason to leave, especially in this bone-chilling cold. When the wall clock struck 8 in the evening, Patricia went home, sat down by the phone, and dialed. On the other end was the Poughkeepsie Police Department's dispatch center. Her voice trembled, but was resolute. "My niece is missing. She went out last night with her husband and hasn't come back. I've been calling all day, no one answers. This isn't normal." The dispatcher asked, "Do you know where they went?" "A restaurant by the river, Hudson Grill." The sound of typewriter keys clacked steadily in the dispatch room. Outside, the wind continued whistling through the frame, snow falling thicker, covering all traces of the previous night. The night shift officer recorded the final line in the initial report: female, 27 years old, missing after going out with husband, possibly related to Hudson Riverside area. At Aunt Patricia's house, the dim yellow lamp stayed on all night. On the table, the phone sat next to a cooled cup of coffee. The sound of a train whistle still echoed across the Hudson River as the first morning of the search began. The sky was dull gray, snow blanketing the paths, and every branch bent under the thick ice. Wind from the river surface blew in stinging cold, carrying the damp, rotten smell of water and wood. A patrol car turned onto the small bridge leading to the old dock area, where, according to Aunt Patricia, the couple had gone the night before. The first officers on scene were silent, only the crunch of footsteps on snow as they fanned out around the riverside area. Through the hazy fog, the patrol car's headlights cast light on weathered wooden pilings protruding from the partially frozen water surface. A young officer spotted tire tracks, still imprinted on the old snow, running close to the edge of the road leading down to the dock. He crouched down, brushed off a thin layer of ice, and called his colleague. A few meters away, a faint light gleamed from the white fog, two headlights still dimly lit. As they approached, the fog gradually cleared, revealing the blue Ford parked askew on the shoulder, snow covering half the roof. The car door was closed, but the interior was pitch black. An officer shone a flashlight through the fogged-up window glass. The passenger seat was messy. A beige women's coat draped across the armrest, a woolen scarf fallen to the floor. No purse, no phone, no bloodstains or signs of struggle. The air inside still carried a faint scent of perfume mixed with clammy cold. Outside, men's shoe prints overlapped on the snow, stretching toward the highway, then disappearing at the edge of the road leading away. Someone left here not long before the snow started falling again, an officer said, his voice hoarse from the cold. They decided to split up and follow the footprints, while two others checked the area near the dock. The river surface was flat and still, only the trickle of water beneath the thin ice audible. No signs at all of the missing woman. Nearly half a mile away, along Route 9G, a truck driver reported seeing a man staggering along the roadside, sleeve torn and bloodied. The patrol car immediately changed direction. When the red lights swept through the fog, they saw Richard Porter trying to walk, head slightly bowed, right hand clutching his chest. He stopped, raising a hand to shield his eyes from the headlights. His face was pale, lips blue from the cold. "Mr. Porter?" the officer called out. Richard nodded faintly, breath coming in gasps. "We were attacked. A man, he had a gun. I tried to push her behind me, then I heard the shot." He paused, his clouded eyes gazing toward the fog-shrouded river. "I didn't see her anymore." He was helped into the car, shivering from the cold. As the car pulled away, the white fog swallowed the riverbank again. In the distance, officers were still shining lights around the dock area, calling Elaine's name, echoing through the snow, but only the wind answered. At St. Francis Hospital, Richard received temporary bandaging. Doctors determined he had several minor wounds to the shoulder and right chest, non-life-threatening. When questioned, he repeated only one thing: "We were robbed." He shot and ran. His voice was even almost emotionless. A nurse recounted that while stitching the wounds, he asked nothing about his wife, only requested a hot cup of coffee. By afternoon, the weather worsened. Heavy snow made searching nearly impossible, but police continued combing the dock area, even bringing in boats to deeper waters. No sign of Elaine, nothing but the abandoned car. An older officer whispered, "If she fell into the river, there'd at least be drag marks or something. But here, there's nothing at all." News spread quickly. In town, everyone was talking about the young nurse's disappearance. Rumors began circulating. Some said they heard gunshots, others claimed to have seen car lights late at night, but no one was certain of anything. As darkness fell again over the Hudson, the search team returned in silence. The Ford was towed to the impound lot for further examination. In the dim yellow light of the police station, a steaming cup of coffee sat on the duty desk. A young officer opened his notebook, writing the first line of the new shift: "Female 27 years old, missing after going out with husband." At the other end of town, in Aunt Patricia's small house, the phone sat silent on the table. She leaned back in her chair, staring out the window. Snow in the yard had piled up to the steps, streetlights reflecting a faint halo on the ice. In that eerily quiet moment, she could only wait for a knock at the door or a phone call that might answer the question the whole town was whispering: where is Elaine Porter? That afternoon, low clouds blanketed the Hudson River, wind blowing back from the water surface with biting cold. When Frank Cole arrived, the dock area was cordoned off with yellow tape. Patrol cars lined the path, lights flashing in the fog. He hunched through the damp snow, his boots leaving deep imprints next to the askew blue Ford parked there. The car sat silent and isolated against the white ground, as if abandoned for the entire winter. Cole opened the driver's door, cold air wafting out, no smell of gunpowder scorch, no signs of a struggle. The passenger seat still had the women's coat draped over it, a woolen scarf fallen to the floor. On the door panel near the glass, he spotted a small brownish-red streak, dried and mixed with ice dust. He leaned low, shone his flashlight, a drop of blood, no bigger than a kernel of corn. "Mark this spot," he said quietly. A technician called him over. 2 9mm casings, side by side. They lay angled at the edge of the path, a few meters from the car's front. Cole knelt, observing the direction of the casing's ejection. The narrow angle indicated the shooter was low to the ground, close. This position was right at the dock entrance, not against the car body. He envisioned the scene, a shot, then someone stepping out of the car, or firing from outside. On the water-spotted snow, there were faint shoe prints. One road deeply imprinted, large soles, men's boots running straight toward the main road. A few steps away, smaller ones, women's shoe toes, pointing back toward the dock edge. 3 prints, then stopping. No continuation, no drag marks, no churned-up ground. Fresh snow had fallen overnight, but if there had been a struggle, there would at least be signs. Cole looked around, seeing only wind swirling over the river's surface. He requested samples of the bloodstain, close-up photos of the entire area. As the technician placed the measuring ruler, the flash lit up, reflecting off the white mist. The air was thick with a metallic smell, cold and starkly clean. Everything was too quiet, too neat. "A robbery doesn't go down like this," Cole muttered to himself, but kept it in his head. At the dock's edge, moss-covered wooden planks gleamed slickly down to the black water. He tested stepping lightly. The ice was brittle but solid. If Elaine had fallen, the deck would have splintered, or at least there'd be scratches. Here, the snow was pristine, only slightly depressed under his heel. Beneath the wooden bridge, water flowed slowly, not cold enough to fully freeze. Thin ice floes clinked against each other. He scanned along the bank, seeing no slide marks or snagged debris. An officer brought a sealed paper, a quick report from St. Francis Hospital. "Husband is lucid, 4 grazing bullet wounds, none penetrating. Doctor says he'll recover." Cole didn't read it all, just folded it and pocketed it. He looked toward the road where Richard was found that morning. The distance was just over a mile, a gentle slope, snow deep to the ankles. A wounded man running that stretch should have left a trail of blood, but there was none. The footprints from the car to the road were even, spaced rhythmically, no pauses, no stumbles. "Anything else in the car?" he asked. "A restaurant receipt from last night, an old photo, no wallet, no purse." "Bullet holes in the car?" "None, sir." Cole tapped his fingers, calculating. 2 casings outside the car, no bullet damage on the body. If shots were fired, they didn't come from inside. The 9mm casings were pristine, unscratched. Wind whipped across the river, dragging thick fog that blurred everything in seconds. He turned back to the Ford, feeling like it had been placed there deliberately, neatly to a suspicious degree. Late afternoon, he went to the hospital. In the room, Richard Porter lay propped up on pillows, arm wrapped in white bandages, eyes vacant. "I'm Detective Frank Cole," he said softly, pulling up a chair beside the bed. "I want you to tell me about last night." Richard's voice was weak but steady. He recounted that they had dinner, left the restaurant, stopped by the river to look at the view. A man appeared from the darkness. He pointed a gun, yelled something I couldn't hear clearly. I lunged at him. He shot. I fell. When I looked up, Elaine was gone. He paused, breathing heavily, then added, I ran up to the road looking for help, but no one stopped. Cole asked, Did you get a good look at his face? No. He had a hat on, maybe white. What did he take from you? Nothing. I don't think he wanted to rob us. Did you call the police? No. I left my phone in the car. Cole looked at him longer than necessary. The headlights were still on. Keys in the ignition. You left it like that? Richard was silent for a few seconds, lips trembling slightly. I don't remember, I panicked. When Cole left the hospital, dusk had painted the sky in coppery gray. He paused by a hallway window, watching the snow fall slowly outside. Everything he heard tonight was just plausible enough not to be contradicted, but too rounded to be true. At the dock, every trace told a silent story. No struggle, no haste, just one person leaving, one vanishing. Cole tightened his collar, stepped outside, river wind lashing his face. In his mind, the earlier phrase echoed, clear as a warning. Robbers don't act like this. The next morning, fog still clung to the Hudson River surface. The first daylight was hazy, slipping through the frosted hospital window glass, casting a cold yellow on the wall. In the small room at the end of the hall, Richard Porter lay back against his pillows, right arm bandaged white, chest taped with gauze. On the bedside table, a cooled coffee cup sat with a black scum around the rim. Detective Frank Cole stood at the foot of the bed, arms crossed, observing the young man with a polished appearance, pale face, but not at all haggard like someone who'd just escaped death. He spoke to the nurse in a calm voice, eyes more alert than a patient who'd been shot 4 times should have. Cole didn't interrupt, just listened, waiting for the on-duty doctor to arrive. Dr. Harris, who handled the night shift before, entered with a file. He set it on the table, flipped the first few pages, voice even and cool. The patient has 4 grazing bullet wounds, right shoulder, right chest, right hip, and back of the right hand. No bullets penetrated the body. They only created shallow furrows, minimal blood loss, no fractures, no internal injuries. Cole leaned down to skim it. So none were life-threatening, none, the doctor replied. And here's the notable part. The wounds are in areas with thick muscle tissue, completely avoiding major blood vessels and lungs. If you want to inflict injury without killing, shooting in these positions is the precise choice. Cole looked up. You saying this guy got lucky? Not luck, Harris corrected. This is calculated. The hip and shoulder shots are nearly parallel to the skin surface, angled from right to left, uniform depth. Whoever fired this either stood close and intentionally angled away, or self-inflicted, in a controlled position. He lightly placed his hand on the X-ray. Look at this spot. If the bullet had veered 2 more centimeters, it would have pierced the lung. But all stopped at nearly the same distance. Too precise to be random. Cole was silent for a long moment. In his mind, the image of the Ford on the snow, casings angled at the road's edge, a man in the pitch-black cold night, trembling with fear, yet controlling the shot angles to the centimeter, hard to believe. Gunpowder residue test done? He asked. Done, Harris replied. No gunshot residue on the skin or clothes, both hands negative. If he was shot at close range, we'd see stippling or burn particles. None. Cole looked at Richard. The man sat up straight, fingers lightly tapping the bed rail, eyes toward the window. You said, attacked at what distance? About 3 meters. He was close to the car, gun pointed straight. Richard answered quickly, like reciting. Cole stepped closer, eyes fixed on his face. At that range, a 9 mm leaves smoke and soot, but you have none. Richard shrugged, forcing a tired smile. Maybe the wind blew it all away. You know, last night the wind was strong. Cole didn't respond. He looked down at the bandages around Richard's chest. Clean white gauze, freshly changed that morning, no blood seeping. Wounded people usually retain winces in movement, but Richard lifted a water cup with his right hand, shoulder only slightly creasing. Pain, yes, but not much. When the doctor left the room, Cole stood by the window, watching snow melt gradually on the sill. You know anatomy, Porter? he asked. Richard frowned, tilting his head slightly. What are you asking? Just thinking. Shots that precise, you must understand the human body to some degree. The man was silent for a few seconds, then said slowly, I played sports in college. Maybe that's why my reflexes are good. Cole smiled faintly. Reflexes don't teach you to dodge 4 grazing bullets. Reflexes just help you fall fast. They don't make bullets veer. The remark made the room's atmosphere sag. The wind whistling outside the door crack sounded clearer. Richard turned his face away, eyes fixed on the pale sky. Cole gathered the file, folded it. I'll need to talk to you more when you're stronger. Before leaving the room, he paused, saying almost to himself, this was calculated, not luck. In the hallway, he stopped, looking back toward the patient wing. Inside, Richard's shadow stretched long on the wall, a shadow silent and feigning fatigue. At the other end of the hall, the sharp smell of disinfectant mixed with the crunch of police boots on tile. Cole felt something in this story didn't hold up, like those bullets. Flying true, but landing in the strange void between life and death. Outside the hospital, the Hudson River lay fog-shrouded, water still flowing heavily southward. Cole descended the steps, taking a deep breath. He knew he'd just crossed the thin line between accident and calculated. Elaine Porter's disappearance, if truly tied to those bullets, wouldn't just be a tale of misfortune. It was starting to take the shape of a plan. And he, Frank Cole, was beginning to see its form, hazy but more real than any account. 3 days after Richard was discharged from the hospital, the Hudson Valley sky remained frozen cold. Heavy clouds hung low over the river surface, occasionally brightened by faint rays of sunlight, only to be swallowed again by gray mist. Rescue teams had been on site since early morning, bringing motorboats and magnetic detection equipment. The roar of engines cracked through the still air, echoing off the barren riverbanks, lined with leafless branches. Frank Cole stood on the bank observing, his long coat flapping in the wind. He had monitored every search over the 3 days, but the water surface still reflected only a solid black. Divers went down and came up, breaths puffing out in white clouds, heads shaking slightly each time they found nothing. Beside him, an officer swept binoculars along the riverbank. Nothing at all, he said. If she fell in, the current would have swept the body out of this area by now. Cole didn't respond, just stared at the slow-flowing water beneath the dock. He knew this stretch of the Hudson wasn't as deep as farther south. The surface was calm, even nearly stagnant in spots. His instincts told him that if Elaine had truly fallen here, her body should have surfaced or snagged somewhere around the dock. Yet, there was nothing. By the 4th day, as the search team expanded the radius 3 miles downstream, a young officer shouted from the bow of the boat, "Detective Cole, there's something here." They hauled up a soft object tightly wrapped in thin ice, a cream-colored woolen scarf, fibers twisted, one end torn as if yanked hard. A few meters away, caught in the bankside brush, was a women's leather shoe, style and size matching Aunt Patricia's description of the pair Elaine had worn that night. Cole bent down, carefully lifting the scarf. The wool was waterlogged, reeking of the river's sharp scent. But along the inner edge remained a stiff, dark brown streak. He examined it closely, then handed it to the technician. "Bag it separately, send it straight to the Albany lab. I want to know if this is human blood." That evening, snow began falling again. In the temporary office set up at the police station, Cole spread the Hudson River map across the table, marking the evidence discovery area. The desk lamp cast light on the pale yellow paper, bold and faint pencil lines overlapping. The river appeared as a winding ribbon of darkness between shadowed banks. He traced his finger from the dock position to where the shoe was found, less than 2 kilometers. If the current were strong, a light object like a woolen scarf would have drifted much farther. That could only mean someone had placed them there, deliberately to throw off the trail. When the lab results came back, the technician said curtly over the phone, "The sample on the scarf is human blood, type O. Same as victim Elaine Porter." The answer left Cole stunned. The fluorescent light overhead flickered once, reflecting cold light onto the file stack. He looked at the crime scene photo of the Ford. The coat still there, driver's seat clean, car doors unscratched. Then at the new photo of the blood-stained scarf. The two images side by side created an irreconcilable contradiction. A woman vanishing without a trace, yet leaving bloodied items miles from the scene. It couldn't be a hasty kidnapping. Someone had had time, means, and above all, planning. That afternoon, Cole returned to the dock. The river surface remained flat, ice floes drifting lazily under the wind. He leaned over, eyes narrowing slightly. The familiar feeling rose again, that intuition from someone who'd chased hundreds of cases. If there's no sign of struggle, it means everything went according to one person's intent. Robbers don't pick deserted docks. Robbers don't shoot and leave empty-handed, he said softly. The young trooper beside him looked at him, hesitating before asking, "So, what do you think, sir?" Cole lit a cigarette, smoke blending into the mist. "I think," he said, voice low, "that woman wasn't dragged into the water. She was killed, and someone took the body away before we arrived." The river wind blew stronger, scattering ash at his feet. He gazed along the slippery grassy bank, feeling as if the Hudson itself was holding a secret, hidden somewhere between the cold mud and pebbles. But that secret couldn't stay buried forever. What they found today, the scarf, the shoe, the bloodstain, was just the beginning of something larger, darker. Cole stood still watching the water, the cigarette's red glow fading. In his mind, one question repeated: if Elaine isn't under the river, then where is she? Late that night, after the search team wrapped up the fourth day, Frank Cole sat alone in the office. The Hudson River map still sprawled across the table, beside a cooled cup of coffee and a thick stack of files. Disparate details began connecting in his head. The tidy car, the bullets avoiding vital spots, the O-type blood-stained woolen scarf, and the husband escaping too perfectly. There was something cold, calculated in the entire picture. Cole leaned back in his chair, eyes stopping at the morning newspaper on it, a photo of Richard Porter smiling with his wife in their wedding frame, a small caption below, "Poughkeepsie's power couple." The next morning, Cole requested access to Richard's financial records. The bank accounting department took nearly half a day to send the statements, and the moment he saw the numbers, he knew he'd hit the main vein of the case. Just 2 weeks before Elaine's disappearance, Richard had purchased a $2 million life insurance policy on his wife, with himself as the sole beneficiary. The initial premium had been paid in full, the application signed by Richard himself. Cole tapped his pen on the table, rhythm steady and slow. Large policies usually appeared when the buyer was preparing for a long trip or securing family safety, but Elaine had never left town, and her nurse's salary couldn't cover a package like that. "Who convinced her to sign?" he asked, the bank employee over the phone. The other end went silent for a few seconds, then replied, "Not her, sir. Mr. Porter submitted the application with his wife's signature, but we never saw her come in." By then, Cole knew it was time to broaden the investigation. He summoned a few people who'd worked with Richard at the company office in Albany. Most were guarded, saying their boss was smart, slick, and seemed very confident. A young woman, the administrative secretary, after several hesitations, lowered her voice. "I'm not sure I should say, but before Mr. Porter was close with Shannon Keller, she works in the partner company's car rental department. They had lunch together many times, and I once saw him give her flowers." Cole requested Shannon Keller's address. She lived in downtown Albany, in a small second-floor apartment. When he arrived, Shannon opened the door warily. She was about 30, with lightly curled brown hair, face gaunt from lack of sleep. At the mention of Elaine Porter's name, she shuddered briefly, then fell silent for a long time before speaking. "I didn't know she was missing. I thought they were still together." Cole took his time, setting his notebook on the table, voice gentle. "Miss Keller, I'm not here to judge. I just need the truth. What was your relationship with Richard Porter?" Shannon clenched her hands, eyes on the teacup in front of her. "At first, just business. He was polite, always talking about the future, about moving to Albany to open a branch. Then we started having lunches, meeting more. I thought he was having marriage troubles. He said his wife was too busy, didn't care. Did you know about the life insurance? She shook her head. No, but I know he often said things will change soon. I thought he meant divorce. Cole noted every word. When she showed him a few photos from an old Polaroid camera, the two of them standing together at a bar, Richard smiling easily, hand on her back. He glanced briefly, without comment. Back at the office, he reopened the case file. In the dozens of disappearances he'd seen, most shared a common thread. The survivor always played the victim role, repeating the same story to perfection. Richard Porter fit that exactly. No slips, no emotion, and above all, no real grief. That evening, as snow fell thick again, Cole stood by the window, looking down at the empty street. He recalled Dr. Harris's words. Those wounds weren't luck. Now with another piece, the massive insurance and another woman, the picture sharpened. Money, affair, and control. A young officer knocked, handing him a stack of newly taken photos of Shannon for witness comparison. Cole flipped through, pausing at the last one. Richard and Shannon sitting side by side in a coffee shop, just 2 weeks before Elaine's disappearance. He leaned toward her, eyes on her, as if he'd forgotten another world. Cole closed the file stack, voice low. If there's motive, it's right here. And if I'm right, we're not looking for a missing person anymore, but for the one who vanished after murder. He turned off the light, stepped out of the office. Outside, the Hudson still flowed slowly, ice layers clinking against each other in the night. In the wind's howl, Frank Cole knew he'd crossed the final line between suspicion and absolute conviction. The husband wasn't just a witness, he was the center of it all. The next morning, as local papers began running headlines like branch manager's wife vanishes mysteriously by Hudson River, Frank Cole sat at his desk, beside a cooled cup of coffee and a photocopy of Richard Porter's statement transcript. He read slowly, word by word, timeline by timeline, eyes stopping at the night shift officer's scrawled note from that night. Approx. 9:30 p.m. Attacked at dock. Right below, Cole underlined another line. First call reporting injured man needing help, 10:48. Nearly 1 hour and 18 minutes missing from Richard's story. In that span, no one saw him, no one heard cries for help, no phone calls were made, and that night, though cold, there was no blizzard or signal loss. Cole opened the map, spreading it across the table. The stretch from the Poughkeepsie dock to where the truck driver spotted Richard was just over 3 miles, if walking, maximum 15 minutes. So what did he do for the remaining 60 minutes? He muttered. The pencil tapping lightly on the table, he asked a young officer to drive with him, recreating the night's route. As the car rolled over the small bridge, dim yellow streetlights reflected on the snow. Cole looked out the window, voice hoarse. Count how many lit places there are. On that short stretch, they noted 3 24-hour spots, a Shell gas station, a small diner, and Walden's pharmacy at the corner. All lit up all night. Cole stopped at each, questioning the night shift staff. At the gas station, the middle-aged man wiped his hands on his apron, saying, I was on that night. Around 10, 2 cars stopped for gas, otherwise no one walking. And if someone was hurt, I'd have noticed for sure. At the diner, the waitress confirmed similarly. No one came in for help, no blood, no strangers. Cole listened, just nodding. As they drove on, light snow fell, coating the windshield thinly. He looked out, imagining Richard in the scenario he described. Shot 4 times, bleeding, panicked running for help. Yet on that short road, full of lights, full of open shops, he chose the opposite direction, toward the dark, empty road, with no residents. At noon, Cole brought those facts to the hospital. Richard was still in the old room, holding a magazine, composure unbelievably calm. You said the robbery happened at 9:30, Cole asked. Yes, and you sought help right after? I ran straight to the main road. So why weren't you seen until 10:48? Richard looked up, frowning slightly. Don't know, I was dazed. Maybe I passed out on the road. Passed out for 1 hour, 18 minutes? Cole asked again, voice even. And still walked 3 miles, without leaving any blood on the snow. The room's air froze. Richard gave a thin smile, avoiding his gaze. Maybe I got turned around. It was dark that night. Cole leaned back in the chair, silent for a few seconds. He didn't get turned around, he thought. He chose that road because it was dark. That afternoon, back at the dock, he looked out at the thickly fogged river surface. On the bank, traces from before had been nearly erased by the wind. He knew well, every liar leaves a gap, not just in their words, but in their actions themselves. That empty hour, in every case, was always enough time to hide something. Cole stood for a long time, boots pressing into the old snow. In his mind, every piece began fitting together. The insurance policy, the mistress, the intentional wounds, and now an unexplainable time gap. The young officer asked quietly, "Sir, where do you think he went during that time?" Cole didn't turn. He watched the dark waters swirling lightly under the sunset, and replied softly, almost to himself, "Maybe he didn't go anywhere. Maybe he went back to the dock." The wind blew hard, snowflakes shattering in the air. Cole tightened his collar, eyes following the icy river current. "Someone who wants to live," he said slowly, "seeks light, but the one seeking darkness is because he wants to hide something in it." 2 days later, as the snow melted somewhat, and the sun peeked weakly through gray cloud layers, Frank Cole returned to the impound lot where the blue Ford sat sealed. The car was covered in fine dust, tires caked with dried mud in clumps. The garage air was frigid, faintly smelling of gasoline and metal. Cole donned gloves, opened the driver's door, and sat inside. Light from the open frame fell in, casting a dim yellow streak on the dashboard. Everything remained as tidy as the first time he'd seen it at the dock. Passenger seat with Elaine's coat, glove compartment half closed, no signs of disturbance. But something still nagged at him, a feeling that a very small detail was being overlooked. He requested the technician bring the ultraviolet light kit. As the purple beam swept over the door frame and passenger seatbelt, a small dark patch appeared as a faint smear. Cole leaned down to examine, using tweezers to pluck a thin fiber caught in the belt groove. The light reflected off the fabric surface, showing a pale reddish-brown, like wool soaked in blood and hardened. He placed it in a nylon bag, sealing it. "Get more samples from the buckle area," he said quietly. There, as expected, were a few tiny brown drops, shrunken and dried, stuck in the plastic crevices. She might have sat here, injured, then buckled in, Cole thought. Or someone pulled her back to this seat after the blood fell. Both hypotheses clashed with Richard's story. After finishing sample collection, the technician checked the trunk area further. They found a faint scratch on the lining, like from a heavy object dragged. No blood, but small broken fibers mixed in the dirt. Cole stood watching for a long time, eyes still as if listening to something emanating from the car itself. "What do we have?" the assistant asked. "Not much," Cole replied, voice low. "A bit of blood, a fiber, and an unexplainable gap." All samples were sealed and sent to the Albany lab, along with the 2 casings. In 1976, biological trace analysis was still very limited. The forensics report stated curtly, "Blood-adhered sample, unable to determine type or specific origin." No DNA tracing techniques, no precise micro-comparison equipment. Everything was filed under insufficient basis for conclusion. Cole read the results, feeling as if something weighed on his chest. The clues he'd gathered, the blood stain, the scarf, the wool fiber, the time gap, all existed, but none strong enough to turn suspicion into evidence. He knew well that in his superior's eyes, this case was starting to become an unconfirmed disappearance, no witnesses. That afternoon, he went to the archives himself, where evidence boxes stacked like silent concrete blocks. He opened the metal cabinet labeled, Case 1975-1214, E. Porter. Inside, sealed envelopes holding the wool fiber and blood sample lay beside scene photos. He looked for a moment, then used black ink to add a small line on the file cover's corner. "Not enough, but don't forget yet." As the cabinet door closed, The metal clang echoed down the cold hallway. Cole stood still for a few seconds, eyes toward the window at the end. Outside, the Hudson flowed quietly under a thin mist. He had a hunch this case wasn't over, just the time hadn't come. What they found today, those small blood spots, dragged fibers, would become Elaine's only voice when technology learned to listen. Frank Cole removed his gloves, stuffing them into his coat pocket. He didn't know when the truth would return, but one thing was certain, that car still held its own story, just waiting for someone to read it right. And until then, he'd keep everything intact in the steel cabinet, in memory, and in the obsession over the woman who vanished into the Hudson mist. Spring 1977 came, and the ice on the Hudson River melted slower than any year. The final dive teams pulled out, carrying promises to return when the water warmed. But no one truly believed there was anything left to find. Elaine Porter's disappearance gradually slipped from the local paper's front pages. Poughkeepsie residents began talking about other things: exam season, rising gas prices, distant news events. Only a few, and among them, Frank Cole, still couldn't forget the image of the river-soaked woolen scarf and the small bloodstain on the seatbelt. For months after, he reviewed the file himself whenever he had time. Everything was documented in detail: dock location, time Richard was found, lab results, Shannon Keller's statement, even hand-annotated Hudson hydrographic maps. But no new leads, no body, no witnesses, no weapon. Each time he proposed expanding the investigation, his superiors just shook their heads. "No basis anymore, Frank. We need evidence, not hunches." By year's end, the case was officially archived, stamped, inactive, unsolved. The evidence in the metal box was shelved alongside hundreds of others, silent as the water surface where Elaine vanished. Cole stood watching the archivist lock the door, hearing the iron latch click shut, his heart empty. Many years later, he left the force. Hair grayed, eyes still holding that sharp gaze, but hands beginning to tremble slightly when signing papers. Even so, when closing his desk for the last time, he quietly took a copy of the Elaine Porter file, old photocopies, a few scene photos, and handwritten notes he'd never submitted. He stored them in a wooden chest, placed in the corner of his living room in Saratoga Springs. "As long as I'm alive," he told his wife, "this case isn't over." Meanwhile, Richard Porter, the man Cole always believed was the perpetrator, vanished from New York without a word of farewell. In 1978, he sold the small house in Poughkeepsie and withdrew the full amount of Elaine's insurance payout after the company paid out. Despite police objections, but lacking criminal evidence, they couldn't stop it. Richard moved to Portland, Oregon, where no one knew his past. There, he opened a small financial consulting firm and gradually rebuilt his life. A few years later, he remarried a woman named Laura May, a gentle elementary school teacher. They bought a 2-story house in the suburbs, raised a golden retriever, and in the eyes of the neighbors, Richard was the picture of an honest, reliable man. No one knew that in his home filing cabinet, there was a small locked compartment containing yellowed old papers, the life insurance policy of Elaine Porter, still bearing the original ink signature. In Poughkeepsie, time did not fade Elaine's family's memories. Aunt Patricia Marsh, the first to report to the police, brought flowers to the old dock every year. She didn't believe her niece had been robbed or run away. In her small house, Elaine's photo in a silver frame was dusted clean every week, like a ritual. She didn't leave, she often told people. She was taken by someone. Occasionally, on rainy nights, Patricia still called Cole. The two spoke very little, just simple phrases like, "Any new leads," and "I'm still keeping the file." Even knowing nothing had changed, his voice remained warm and steady. "When the chance comes, I'll reopen it." But for more than 30 years after that, the chance never came. Technology wasn't advanced enough, witnesses aged, and the evidence lay dormant in the forensics lab's cold storage, labeled Case 1975-1214. Evidence preserved. Every winter, the Hudson froze, then thawed, then froze again. The current still flowed past where Elaine vanished, and her case became one of hundreds of forgotten cold cases. But for Frank Cole, it had never truly closed. He understood that it would only take one reason: a breakthrough, a DNA strand, a returning witness for that past to rise up like the Hudson surface when the ice breaks. And in Oregon, every time the wind blew through Richard Porter's window, that wind carried a strange tone, as if the Hudson were still calling the name of the person he'd tried to bury for 30 years. February 2011, Albany was still buried in thick snow and white fog. Inside the New York State Police Headquarters building, the third-floor old record storage was as cold as a freezer. Along the rows of steel cabinets, thousands of gray file boxes stacked atop one another, each tagged with a case number long sunk into oblivion. Laura Benton, 32 years old, walked slowly down the hallway, hands deep in her coat pockets, breath puffing out in clouds. She'd been with the Albany Cold Case Unit for 6 months, a small team dedicated to reviewing unsolved cases from decades past. Most of her older colleagues called it the most boring job in policing, just dusty files and dead faces, but, for Benton, that was why she chose it. Every old file has its own voice, she'd told her superiors once. People just stopped listening. That morning, she was assigned to check disappearances related to the Hudson River area from the 1970s. As she scanned the index, her eyes stopped at the typed line in old font, Case 1975-1214, missing female, Elaine Porter. She pulled the box from the shelf. Dust billowed up, the smell of damp paper and time hitting her nose. On the lid was handwriting in black ink: Cole, F., lead investigator. Benton vaguely remembered the name Frank Cole, the legendary retired detective famous for pursuing cases no one else wanted to touch. Inside the box, the old evidence remained preserved intact in sealed bags: a cream-colored woolen scarf with a dried blood stain, a small wool fiber, 2 9mm casings, several crime scene photos, and Richard Porter's medical file. The husband. In the middle of the documents were a few yellowed pages, corners folded, with straight, firm handwriting. Benton flipped through 4 bullets avoiding vital organs. No gunshot residue. Car doors unbroken. No struggle. Headlights on. Keys in ignition. He didn't cry. He acted. She paused, eyes fixed on the last line. The scrawled but forceful words had something both cold and haunting. Benton read it softly, almost whispering, "He didn't cry. He acted." That sentence sent a chill down her spine. She sat at the table, laying everything out in front of her. The first photo was of the Ford, parked askew on the shoulder, door half open, headlights casting a dim glow through the fog. The next showed the woolen scarf on the exam table, the dark blood stain looking almost fresh. The third was Richard's face in the hospital, white bandages around his shoulder, eyes staring straight into the lens, calm to a terrifying degree. Benton flipped a few more pages: statement transcripts, financial reports, and the insurance company record, with $2 million standing out in the middle line. She read each detail slowly, imagining the snow-covered dock, the bloodied man claiming victimhood, and a woman vanishing without a trace. When she closed the file, she leaned back in the chair, staring out the window, where snow was falling thick outside. 40 years had passed. Most people involved were now elderly or dead. But in that husband's gaze, through the black and white photo, the coldness remained, as if he knew no one would ever reach him. Benton took a deep breath, picked up the desk phone. "Get me Detective Frank Cole's file," she said to the archivist. "I need his most recent contact info, if he's still alive." Hanging up, she turned back to the box on the table. In a small compartment, she found an extra envelope labeled "Personal, Do Not File." Inside was just a short note, in Cole's slanted handwriting: "If anyone reads this, remember, time doesn't erase the truth. It just makes us forget how to find it." Laura Benton folded the paper, placed it on the table. A familiar feeling rose in her, the investigator's urge, when encountering something unfinished. This case wasn't over, it was just sleeping, waiting for someone to wake it. She stood, looking around the silent storage room, then said softly, as if answering the note's writer, from 36 years ago. All right, Mr. Cole, I'll listen. That very afternoon, Benton officially signed the request to reopen the Elaine Porter file. At the top of the page, she wrote in small decisive script, "Cold Case Reinvestigation, 2011. Outside, the Hudson still flowed, slow and cold as 40 years before, but this time, it was about to give back a piece of the truth it had held too long. When the Elaine Porter file was officially reopened, Laura Benton knew the first step was to resubmit all the evidence for testing with modern forensics technology. Over 30 years had passed, and science had completely changed how traces were read. She immediately contacted the Albany Forensics Lab, where the original sealed samples from 1975 were stored. Things no one back then could have imagined would become invaluable. In the stark white cold room, the technician opened the metal box, labeled Case 1975-1214. Inside, the evidence bags still bore faded red wax seals, wrapped in multiple layers of plastic. When the seals were cut, a dry metallic smell and dusty age wafted out in a stale chill. The cream-colored woolen scarf and wool fiber were placed under ultraviolet light, looking as if time had never passed. Benton stood outside the observation glass, watching the team's meticulous movements. A drop of solution was applied to the dried bloodstain, then extracted and loaded into a specialized tube. "We'll process it with DNA reconstruction protocol," the technician said. "The genetic material recovery rate might be low, but not zero." 3 days later, the first results arrived. Benton took the report, eyes scanning the first line. Sample A, woolen scarf, human blood. Type O, DNA profile hash, 241. Confirmed match to victim, Elaine Porter. The second line made her pause longer. Sample bud, seatbelt, trace blood. DNA partial match to Richard Porter, husband. She read it again to make sure she wasn't mistaken. The small blood stain on the seatbelt, what couldn't be sourced in 1976, now spoke clearly. Richard Porter had been in the passenger seat position where Elaine was last believed to have sat. Benton took a deep breath, leaning back in her chair. The room suddenly went so quiet, she could hear the clocks ticking. Everything Cole had suspected now had foundation. He didn't cry, he acted. The old file note resurfaced in her mind, chillingly clear. That afternoon, she drove to the ballistics lab. A middle-aged expert pointed to the simulation board. "Based on the 9mm casing positions and trajectories, I can confirm the victim was shot from under 1 meter away. It couldn't have been during a struggle. This was deliberate shooting." "Robbers don't do this," Benton said softly. The other nodded. Right. He was close, knew exactly what he was doing. As she left the room, Albany's sky began darkening. Snow flurried in the wind, reflecting yellow lights into faint streaks. In Benton's mind, the old pieces rushed together. The insurance policy, the affair, the intentional wounds, and now DNA. Everything fit into a single shape. That evening, she sat alone in the empty office, just the desk lamp and the heater's hiss. On her computer screen was the 1975 black and white photo of Richard Porter, cold eyes and faint smile. Benton hesitated, then opened the internal directory, searching Frank Cole, retired investigator. The Saratoga Springs landline was still listed. She dialed. The other end rang, then a man's hoarse, slow but clear voice. "Cole here, detective. This is Laura Benton, Albany Cold Case Unit. I'm reinvestigating the Elaine Porter file. I think you'd want to know, we have DNA results." A long silence, only wind whistling over the line. Then Cole's voice trembled slightly. "DNA? What did they find?" "Her blood matches the sample on the scarf, and on the seatbelt, there's a sample matching Richard Porter." Cole exhaled sharply, as if holding it for 30 years. "I knew it. I told them, but no one believed." "Thank you, girl. Will you help me?" Benton asked. "I want to reconstruct the whole case. I need someone who was there." "Send me the latest file copy," he replied immediately. "I'll drive down to Albany tomorrow morning." It's time the Hudson gave back the truth. When the call ended, Benton sat still, staring out the window where snow still fell thick. In the dim light, She saw her reflection next to Cole's old photo stored in the file, aged eyes but unyielding. 2 generations of investigators, nearly 4 decades apart, now stood at the same point on the threshold of buried justice. Benton turned off the light, packed the file into her briefcase. In her heart, the Hudson winter's chill seemed to yield to another warmth, the feeling when knowing a secret was about to stop being secret. 2 weeks later, as Albany's snow began melting, DIAD, Laura Benton's investigation team, in coordination with the New York State Forensics Lab, officially reconstructed the entire scene of Elaine Porter's 1975 disappearance. They chose an old warehouse by the riverbank, converted into a 3D simulation room for historical cases. Every detail from Frank Cole's old file was scanned into the system. Scene photos, sketch maps, the Ford's position, footprints, casings, even Hudson hydrographic data from that December 12th night. Benton stood in the dark room, light from the projector sweeping pale blue lines across her face. The scene model appeared on the wall. The old wooden dock, the narrow road leading down to the pier, the car parked askew, headlights sweeping dimly through the fog. Beside it were 2 figures, 3D models of Richard and Elaine, built to real scale. The technician's voice echoed evenly through the speakers. We've input the 9mm casing data, 47-degree ejection angle, northward trajectory. Now simulating the initial struggle with robber scenario from the statement. On the screen, the Richard model lunged toward a simulated attacker figure. The weapon recoiled, bullet fired, trajectory veering up toward the right shoulder. Results displayed, minimum firing distance 3 meters, angled from outside in, not matching Richard's injury positions in the medical report. There's no way these wounds match if he was being attacked by someone else, the technician concluded. The trajectories are too stable, the force too even. This is an active stance, not defensive reflex. Benton nodded, eyes fixed on the projection. Try the self-shooting model. They switched poses. The Richard model standing alone. Gun aimed at his right shoulder at 35 degrees, 60 centimeters from the body. As the virtual shot rang out, the bullet path, casing ejection and blood trail on the body, all matched the collected scene data. Everything closed like a perfect equation. No one in the room said more. Only the fan's hum and the sparkling blue light on the wall remained. After a few seconds of silence, Benton said softly, "This wasn't a robbery. This was a stage." That afternoon, they went to the field. The old dock from back then was now just rotting wooden frames, half submerged in the Hudson. But Benton wanted to see it firsthand. She and 2 forensics techs remeasured water depth against archived December 1975 meteorological data. The river surface was wider now, but the current weak. Based on that year's hydrograph, the water was only about 4 feet deep, too shallow to sweep away an adult body. "You think the body didn't go into the river?" the forensics tech asked. Benton leaned over the murky water, replying softly, "No, she wasn't swept away. She was taken away." She walked along the wooden pier, eyes scanning every direction. A few dozen meters from the dock was the path leading up to the paved road, where Richard claimed he fled. Benton stopped in the middle, reimagining that night's scene. Dim headlights, a gunshot echoing through the fog, then absolute silence. Every detail in the file suddenly became chillingly clear. Richard's precise wounds, the 1-hour 18-minute gap, and the later scattered evidence, all telling the same story. That evening, she invited Frank Cole to view the reconstruction. He was 66 now, hair silver, but gaze as sharp as ever. As the 3D model replayed the full scene, Cole stood still, gripping his hat brim tightly. When the simulated bullet pierced the air and stopped exactly at Richard's wound position, he said softly, "I knew it. He shot himself. I saw it that night." Benton turned to him. "You suspected he killed Elaine, right?" "No suspicion," Cole replied, voice low. "I was certain. I just didn't have the tools to prove it. Now you do." They watched the projection together, where the Elaine model stood silent by the dock, Hudson wind whipping her scarf. The image shifted to hydrographic simulation, December 1975. Current, 0.8 knots speed, southeast direction. An average 60 kilograms body couldn't drift more than 50 meters, the technician explained. If she fell here, the body should have surfaced within 48 hours, but no one found it. That means someone moved the body. Cole clenched his fist lightly. Benton looked up at the digital map where the system marked possible routes to transport the body from the dock outward. That road was the path up to the highway, where Richard claimed he fled for help. When the simulation ended, the room fell silent. Benton turned off the projector, white light returning, revealing everyone's faces in weary tension. She picked up her pen, jotting a few lines in her notebook. "What are you writing?" Cole asked. "Just one sentence," she replied. Elaine Porter was shot at the dock. Her body was taken away, never falling into the water, and the only one who could have done that is the man who said he ran away to get help. Cole looked at her, eyes mixing sorrow and relief. "This old man waited 36 years just to hear that," he said softly. Benton closed the notebook, looking out the large window where the Hudson curved in the afternoon fog. The current still flowed, serene, as if nothing had happened. But now, to her, it had spoken. And the answer rang clear in her mind. Elaine Porter didn't disappear. She was killed right on that riverbank, in the cold night of 1975. When the evidence from the reconstruction was finalized, debtor Laura Benton knew it was time to face the one person who'd stood in the shadows for 36 years, Richard Porter. She opened civil records, tracing every latest detail on the man. The system took seconds to display the address: Portland, Oregon. A small note at the bottom read, "Owner of financial consulting firm remarried 1985. Benton flew to Oregon with a federal officer. The city greeted her with damp drizzle and slick hilly streets. Richard lived in a quiet, two-story suburban home, front yard full of pines. Neighbors described him as polite, quiet, morning jogger, occasionally golfs with clients. No one here knew about the 1975 disappearance. To them, Richard was just a successful, reserved, middle-aged man. Benton sat in the car, looking through the window at the lit-up front door. The silhouette of the tall man, shoulders still slightly tilted to the right, the same side as the old wound. "He still carries it," she said softly. "A memory that never fades." The next day she approached the bank where Richard had opened his account. The old financial records were perfectly preserved. Every year he steadily received interest from Elaine Porter's life insurance policy, the over $2 million principal invested in bond funds. That meant, for 35 years, Richard had been living off the legacy of the woman he'd once claimed was robbed and killed. "No one canceled the old insurance policy?" Benton asked the branch manager. "No, ma'am, it's still active. The current owner is still Mr. Richard Porter." The answer chilled her. He hadn't just escaped punishment. He'd sustained himself with the very death he'd created. When the investigation team obtained a search warrant for the house, Cole, now temporarily staying in Albany to assist, called Benton. "He's always been careful, you won't find the weapon. But he left something else, something that shows how he thinks." Cole was right. In Richard's study, among dozens of financial ledgers and client files, Benton discovered a small leather-bound notebook, old and frayed at the edges, shoved deep into the bottom desk drawer. Amid notes on investment strategies were a few lines in a completely different handwriting. "Wound right chest, avoid lungs. Safe distance 60 centimeters, 35 degrees angle. Grazing wound, leaves enough blood, but non-lethal." Benton read it over and over, heart pounding. Those numbers couldn't be coincidental. She realized they were exactly the data the 3D reconstruction had just proven: the shooting angle, position, and distance. Richard had documented how to self-inflict the fake injuries. She carefully photographed it, sealed the notebook. When she returned to the hotel, Portland's rain was pouring heavily. She called Cole, voice low but resolute. "You were right. I found what you mentioned." "What is it?" "A notebook. Medical notes on the wounds, including the shooting angle." On the other end, Cole exhaled sharply. So he calculated everything. He never intended to die that night. No, Benton said, looking out the rain-streaked window. He intended to live, and live off her. The next day, she flew back to Albany, bringing all the evidence, DNA results, 3D simulation images, financial records, and the notebook. In the small conference room at the district attorney's office, Benton and Cole presented every detail. When the photo of the blood-stained woolen scarf appeared on the screen, followed by the notebook image, the room fell silent. An older prosecutor looked at Cole and asked, "You followed this from the beginning. What do you think?" Cole replied slowly, clearly, "I think she never fell into the river. I think he killed her, staged the robbery, then shot himself to be believed. And for 36 years, he's lived off the money of the woman he buried." No one objected. Finally, the prosecutor signed the warrant. Black ink bled slightly on the paper, like a period at the end of 3 decades of silence. Holding the arrest warrant copy in her hand, Benton looked out the office window, where late-season snow was falling lightly. She thought of the image of Elaine Porter in the old photo, gentle smile amid the Hudson winds, and of Frank Cole, who'd spent half his life waiting for this moment. "It's time," she said softly, "to bring him back to where it all began." 36 years after the night the Hudson drowned in fog, the arrest warrant for Richard Porter was officially issued. And this time, there was no room left for shadows to hide. On the morning of August 22, 2011, Portland was immersed in a thin drizzle, the gray sky reflecting on the rain-soaked streets. While suburban residents were preparing for a normal workday, an unmarked police convoy pulled up to the 2-story house on Cedar Hill Road, the home where Richard Porter, now 65, lived with his second wife. 4 Oregon officers, coordinated with 2 investigators from Albany, stepped out of the vehicles, raincoats zipped tight, guns holstered at their sides. Leading them was Det, Laura Benton. She stood under the porch, rain pattering on her hood, eyes fixed on the second-floor window, where a faint yellow light still glowed. In her hand was the arrest warrant signed less than 24 hours earlier, the paper representing over 36 years of waiting for justice. The knock echoed through the damp chill. A middle-aged woman, Richard's current wife, opened the door, face confused. "What's this about?" she asked. Benton flashed her badge. "We have an arrest warrant for Mr. Richard Porter regarding the Elaine Porter case, which occurred in Poughkeepsie, New York, in 1975. Richard appeared at the top of the stairs behind her, coffee mug in hand, silver hair, slow gait, but eyes still cold and alert. He looked around, then stopped at Benton. No surprise on his face, he just asked. Voice low, weary but arrogant, 36 years, and you still haven't let it go. Benton replied evenly, "No, sir, not until Elaine Porter gets to speak." 2 officers advanced, cuffing his hands. Richard didn't resist, just winced slightly from the cold. As he was led outside, he lifted his head to the falling rain, sighing deeply. A neighbor across the street stood stunned, gripping her umbrella, whispering, "He's being arrested? For what?" While Richard was escorted to the car, the forensics team entered the house to execute the search warrant. The second-floor study was sealed first. On the desk they seized the medical notebook Benton had discovered, the one still containing the notes, right chest, avoid lungs. Beside it was the life insurance file in Elaine Porter's name, along with annual transfer statements and Richard's signatures spanning decades. In the second drawer, they found an old envelope containing handwritten letters from Shannon Keller, his former mistress. Benton opened one letter lightly, the paper yellowed, slanted handwriting. "I can't live like this with you, Richard. Every time you talk about freedom, I get scared. I'm scared you'll do something I can't fix." Benton folded the letter, handing it to the evidence collector. She didn't need to read more. Those words said enough about the man now sitting quietly in the police car outside. A man who'd calculated even his freedom with someone else's blood. By noon, the news spread quickly across Oregon, and just hours later, Hudson Valley papers ran the headline in unison. "Arrest in 36-year-old Hudson River case, community in shock." In Poughkeepsie, Aunt Patricia Marsh received a call from the Albany DA's office. Her voice trembled as the person on the line confirmed, "He's been arrested." She only uttered 2 words, "Finally." Then she broke down crying. In Saratoga Springs, Frank Cole sat in his small house, teacup in hand, eyes glued to the TV news. When Richard Porter's aged face appeared on screen, he said nothing, just nodded faintly. In his faded eyes, the steadfast gaze from years ago remained. In Albany, Benton wrote the final line in the arrest report, set down her pen, and leaned back in her chair. Rain still fell outside the window, but in her heart, the sky seemed brighter. 36 years, so many people had waited for this moment, and it had come, quiet but final. As Richard Porter was led away in the prisoner transport van, reporters' flashes popped continuously. He turned his head once, eyes unrepentant, unafraid, just the cold arrogance of someone who'd once believed he'd escape forever. But this time, the Hudson had spoken for Elaine, and the past, no matter how deeply buried, had finally found its way back. The Albany police interrogation room was stark and cold, silent to the point of suffocation. The square room had gray-painted walls, fluorescent lights casting a pallid white glow on the metal table. Rain still pattered outside the window, distant ambulance sirens echoing from downtown. At the table's center, Richard Porter sat ramrod straight, hands clasped, wrists still marked from the cuffs. He stared down at the water glass in front of him, steam fogging the surface. Across the table, death. Laura Benton flipped through the file, while Frank Cole, the man who'd chased this shadow for over 30 years, sat beside her, silent. His eyes held no anger now, just the chill of someone who knew what was coming. Benton began, voice steady, "Mr. Porter, we have DNA test results. The blood sample found on the Ford's passenger seatbelt matches you. The sample on the woolen scarf matches Elaine Porter, both at the dock scene." Richard said nothing. His face was like carved stone, not a muscle twitching. She continued. "Additionally, 3D ballistic simulation proves your wounds were self-inflicted, not from an attack. We have your medical notebook from your home, where you wrote clearly, right chest, avoid lungs, 35 degrees angle. You wrote that, didn't you?" For a moment, Richard's hand trembled slightly, but he clenched it immediately, lifted his head, voice hoarse. "I won't say anything without a lawyer." Cole leaned forward, speaking slowly. "You can wait for your lawyer, but I think you know silence won't erase what you did. I was the first on scene at the dock in 1975. I remember the lights, the car's position, even the casings. And I remember your eyes in the hospital, the eyes of someone who'd accomplished what he planned." Richard glanced at Cole, lips pressing thin, fatigue etching lines around his eyes. He didn't reply, just inhaled deeply, then looked away. Benton kept her voice even, almost gentle. "We don't need your confession. The evidence is enough. But after 36 years, at least, you could tell Elaine's family where she is. Her aunt still keeps her photo on the mantel, brings flowers to the riverbank every year. She never believed she left on her own." The words made the room's air sag. Richard closed his eyes, taking a long breath. When he opened them, the coldness had cracked. "I didn't mean to kill her," he said softly, voice nearly dissolving into the rain outside. Cole looked straight at him. "But you did." Richard was silent for a long time, then recounted slowly, voice breaking in fragments. "That night, we argued in the car. She said she was leaving me, said she'd go to the police about the insurance money. I lost control. I pushed the door open and got out. She followed. She slipped, hit the dock edge hard. I thought she just passed out. I panicked, pulled her up, but the blood was too much." He paused, hands trembling lightly. "I didn't mean to kill her." Benton leaned in, asking softly, "So why stage the robbery, self-shoot, and lie for 36 years? He gave a dry laugh, joyless. "Because when I realized she was dead, I knew there was no going back. I thought if it looked like an attack, they'd believe it. I didn't expect him." Richard glanced at Cole. "To still be chasing it now." Cole replied in a low voice, "It wasn't me, It was her. The room sank into silence. The rain outside grew heavier. Benton set the file down, sliding it toward Richard. You know, the only thing missing from this is where you hid the body. You said she fell, and you dragged it away. Where did you drag it? Richard lifted his head, eyes cloudy, weary, but strangely relieved. He spoke slowly, like someone unburdening a weight. Beacon Woods, about 15 miles south of the dock. I buried her in a rock crevice, under an oak canopy. It was still snowing then. I thought no one would ever find her. Cole closed his eyes. The answer he'd waited a lifetime for now came in the perpetrator's own tired voice. Benton stood, signaling the guard to record the statement and mark the location on the map. She looked at Richard one last time. You're right, we never let go, because the dead have a right to come home too. Richard nodded, head bowing low. As the police escorted him from the room, Cole remained seated, hand trembling lightly on the steel table. 36 years of pursuit, hundreds of times wondering if he'd been wrong, now answered. Benton approached, placing a light hand on his shoulder. We found her, she said. Cole nodded faintly, eyes following the closing door. No, he said softly. She found her own way home. Outside, the rain tapered off. A thin ray of sunlight pierced the window, shining on the metal table where the cold water glass remained. The only evidence of the interrogation that ended 36 years of silence. 3 days after the interrogation, a quiet police convoy left Albany headquarters, heading south along Route 9D, paralleling the Hudson. Early autumn wind blew lightly through the yellowing trees, dry leaves scattering on the damp road. In the lead car, up front, dead. Laura Benton looked at the map spread on her lap, the red dot Richard Porter had redrawn during questioning. Rock crevice east of Beacon Woods, about half a mile from the riverbank. Frank Cole sat beside her, hands clasped on his knees. He'd been silent the whole drive, eyes out the window where the Hudson gradually appeared through the tree lines. I've driven past here hundreds of times, he said softly, without knowing she was right that close. The road into Beacon Woods wound tightly, barely wide enough for a small truck. When the convoy stopped, the air thickened with the scent of earth and rotting leaves. The area had been abandoned for decades, visited only occasionally by hikers. The forensics team laid tarps, set up a field tent, and began cordoning off the area per Porter's coordinates. Benton stood at the edge of the marked excavation pit, coat dusted with dirt. A technician drove stakes, saying quietly, "Estimated depth about 3 feet, something solid down there." They began digging. The shovels plunging into the soil rang out steadily, dry and heavy. Each scoop brought up damp earth and the long-rotted smell of wood. An hour later, the lead digger called out, "Something here." Everyone paused. As the final layer of dirt was brushed aside, a small metal object gleamed in the light. A silver necklace engraved with EP. Benton knelt, carefully sweeping around it with a brush. Beneath the necklace, bone fragments began emerging, mixed in the black soil. A small skull, jawbone with a few teeth intact. She inhaled sharply, eyes stinging. "We found her," she whispered. Elaine Porter. The forensics team took nearly 6 hours to exhume the full remains. The skeleton was laid on a white tarp, each bone fragment catalogued and noted meticulously. Beside it, the silver necklace and a remnant fabric scrap, beige, matching the coat found on the passenger seat in 1975, were placed separately in evidence bags. Cole stood watching silently, not a word. A light drizzle began falling, soft as breath. In the field exam tent, the medical examiner conducted a preliminary check. "The bullet's still there," he said, using forceps to extract a small metal shard from the chest bone. Benton leaned in, watching as they placed it under the magnifier. 9mm parabellum, smooth nose, copper jacket, same type as the 2 casings recovered at the scene. He looked at her, nodding slightly. Same gun, same caliber, no doubt. That evening, the remains were transported to the Albany lab for DNA analysis. Benton and Cole sat back in the car, silent as the evidence crates were loaded neatly in the rear. It was fully dark, Hudson wind blowing bitterly cold. Cole spoke, voice hoarse. 36 years, and she finally gets to leave that place. 2 days later, the DNA results were rushed straight to Benton's desk. She opened the envelope, eyes stopping at the first line. DNA match confirmed. Skeletal remains correspond to victim Elaine Porter, case 1975 to 1214. She folded the paper, exhaling deeply. The office was dead quiet, only the light tap of her pen on the desk. On the wall, the old Poughkeepsie map remained pinned with red dots connecting like a closed timeline, from the dock to the road to Beacon Woods. Everything had finally linked into a single line. That afternoon, Benton brought the results to the prosecutor. In the bright white room, she placed the report on the table, stating firmly, "The Elaine Porter case is no longer a disappearance. This is a confirmed homicide." The words silenced the room for a few seconds. Frank Cole stood beside her, hands clasped. Hearing those words, he nodded faintly. 40 years to say homicide, he said, but worth every day. Benton looked at him, smiling wearily. And worth it for her. On the table, the silver necklace lay in its sealed bag, light catching the EP engraving and making it sparkle. It was no longer an inert piece of evidence, but the final proof closing a 3-decade lie. As they stepped into the hallway, late-day sunlight streamed through the glass, casting long streaks on the walls. Cole paused, looking out the south-facing window. "She's home now," he said quietly. Benton didn't respond, just watched the sunlight fade. She knew that from today, the file Elaine Porter, missing 1,975 inches, would be relabeled. A new line would be printed on the file cover. Homicide. Confirmed by DNA. After 36 years buried in silence, the truth finally surfaced, carrying with it the soul of the forgotten woman and the remaining tears along the Hudson River bank. Winter 2011, Albany was shrouded in cold fog. That morning, the Albany County Supreme Court was packed. On the snow-covered steps, TV cameras, reporters, and locals gathered for the trial the press called the Hudson Widow case. The case that had slept for 36 years, now awakened with justice. In the courtroom, Richard Porter, 65 years old, in a gray suit, aged face but eyes still cold, sat beside his defense attorney. Across from him were Det, Laura Benton, and Frank Cole, who'd pursued this case for nearly half a lifetime. Judge Henry Caldwell banged the gavel to open the trial of defendant Richard Porter on the charge of first-degree murder of Elaine Porter, occurring December 1975. The air in the room thickened. All whispers ceased as prosecutor David Harlan stepped to the podium. He began in an even, deep voice, 36 years. A man lived free, collected insurance money, built a company, started a new life, while the wife he vowed to protect lay cold under the Hudson River soil. Today, DNA, bullet casings, and his own confession will speak for that woman. The screen lit up, displaying images, the 1975 scene, the silver Ford, the blood-stained woolen scarf, the fiber in the seatbelt. Next came the photo of the medical notebook, the scrawled line, right chest, avoid lungs. Harlan continued. No one knows anatomy that well except him. Those bullet wounds weren't luck, they were staged. He shot himself, then told police the couple was robbed. But the evidence, and 40 years of silence, say otherwise. Below, Aunt Patricia Marsh sat in the public gallery, clutching a white handkerchief. When the image of the silver necklace engraved EP appeared, she bowed her head, tears falling silently. It was the defense's turn. Attorney Mark Lowell stood. His voice was measured, trying to pull the room from the heavy atmosphere. Your Honor, this isn't intentional murder. This was an accident. The two argued. Elaine slipped and fell, head hitting the dock. Mr. Porter panicked, staged the scene to avoid suspicion. That foolishness cost him 36 years of guilt. The prosecutor gave a cold smile, stepping up to rebut. An accident? Then why did he buy a $2 million policy 2 weeks before his wife vanished? Why did he still draw interest from it for 30 years? And why was there a letter from Shannon Keller, his mistress, in his home, saying, "I'm scared you'll do something I can't fix"? Whispers rose again. Richard slightly bowed his head, looking at no one. Benton observed from the witness table, noticing his cheek twitch faintly, but no tears. Harlan continued, voice rising gradually, firm. Mr. Porter lived 36 years with lies and dead woman's money. He was so confident he thought time would bury the crime. But DNA doesn't forget. Every drop of blood, every fiber tells the real story. And that story ends with the 9mm bullet in Elaine Porter's chest, the bullet matching exactly the casings at the scene. He turned to the jury. We don't just have evidence, we have his confession. He told investigator Benton, "She fell. I dragged the body. I didn't mean to kill." But ladies and gentlemen, when a man shoots at close range, hides a body, and lives off the insurance, that's no longer an accident. That's murder. The air thickened. The rain outside was audible through the glass panes. It was Benton's turn on the witness stand. She recounted the entire process from finding the dusty file box in 2011 to the DNA results and scene reconstruction. Her voice was calm but decisive. When the prosecutor asked, "Do you believe Elaine Porter was murdered?" she replied, "I don't believe, I know." Then Frank Cole was called. He leaned on his cane, slowly approaching the stand. The room fell silent. His voice was hoarse but steady. "I was at the dock that day. I saw the car, the casings, and a husband with no tears. I told them he was acting, but no one believed. I waited 36 years to say this again. He didn't just stage a robbery, he staged his whole life." As Cole left the stand, many in the courtroom stood in silent applause. It was Richard's turn. Attorney Lowell advised silence, but he refused. He stood, voice low. "I made a mistake, but I never meant to kill her. I loved her. That night, we argued. I lost control. I shot out of fear, not hate. She fell. I panicked. I just didn't want her to leave me." Harlan stepped up, eyes sharp as a knife. "And to keep her. You buried her in Beacon Woods, then lived 36 years off her money. Is that love, Mr. Porter?" Richard bowed his head, silent. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Each day, pieces of the past were rebuilt. Images of the fog-shrouded Hudson, the bullets, the blood, the insurance numbers, and the love letters. The media called it one of America's coldest trials, where past and present collided like breaking ice floes. Late December, the jury retired to deliberate. After 2 days of consideration, they returned to the courtroom, faces stern. The foreman called for all to rise. The clerk read aloud. On the charge of first-degree murder of victim Elaine Porter, the jury finds defendant Richard Porter guilty. The gallery went dead silent, then whispers erupted. Patricia Marsh covered her face and cried. Benton looked at Cole. He closed his eyes, bowed his head, shoulders trembling slightly, not from fatigue, but relief. Harlan stood, eyes on the defendant. "Mr. Porter, justice came 36 years late, but it came. You didn't just take your wife's life, you stole the youth and trust of an entire community. You will no longer be free, as Elaine Porter was no longer allowed to live." Judge Caldwell banged the gavel for sentencing. Richard Porter is sentenced to life imprisonment without parole for first-degree murder. Richard showed no reaction. He just looked up at the light through the courtroom window, then turned to Benton. "You won," he said, voice hoarse. Benton replied softly, "No, Mr. Porter, Elaine won." As the guards led him away, the chains clinked softly on the stone floor. The courtroom door closed, leaving only the wind whistling through the cracks and the dim light shining on the wall where Elaine's photo stood beside white flowers. Outside the courthouse, snow began falling again, covering all footprints. Cole stepped onto the porch, looking up at the overcast sky. Benton walked slowly beside him, file still in hand. 36 years, she said. Finally, the Hudson answered. Cole smiled faintly, voice trembling. No, the Hudson just kept its promise. It told us from the beginning. We just weren't patient enough to listen. The wind blew through the flags in front of the courthouse, making a faint tinkling like bells. In that moment, Benton knew it was all over. Not loudly, not victorious, just justice finally returning. Late, but not lost. News spread faster than the Hudson Valley winter wind. The morning after the verdict, local papers ran the headline in bold, 36 years, truth surfaces from the river. Albany TV stations aired a special report recounting the case thought buried forever. They replayed old footage. The silver Ford parked at the 1975 dock, Hudson fog swirling around, then intercut with the silver necklace engraved EP, sparkling under courtroom lights. Locals who lived near the riverbank back then sat silently before their screens, speechless. In Poughkeepsie, where Elaine once lived, old neighbors were stunned. "We pitied him for years," an elderly woman told a reporter, newspaper in hand. "Thought he was a grieving husband, turns out he was the killer." Those who'd attended Elaine's symbolic funeral in 1976 still remembered Richard's cold eyes that day. No one dared mention it now. At the old dock, now just an abandoned ruin, locals brought flowers to place under the rusted plaque reading, "In memory of Elaine Porter, 1951, 1975. Aunt Patricia Marsh, silver hair white, stood silently for a long time, gazing at the river. "She's home now," she told a reporter. "No longer the missing girl, she's the one who was found." The news also reached Portland, Oregon, where Richard had lived for 30 years as an upstanding businessman. His old neighbors were shocked. "I used to let my daughter go to his house to walk the dog," one man said. "We never thought he was a murderer. He was always smiling, polite, gave free golf lessons to neighborhood kids." Those words rang out, half in shock, half in bitterness. And in Albany, after the case closed, Frank Cole didn't return to Saratoga right away. He stayed a few weeks, helping Benton finalize the last file, organizing every photo, every forensics report, every old note. When finished, he asked for just one copy, the photo of the silver necklace and the line "Homicide confirmed, 2011. He said he'd hang it at home, to remember that truth never dies. In March the following year, Frank Cole passed away in his sleep at age 66. On his desk, they found the Elaine Porter file neatly placed, the cover corner still bearing his 1976 handwriting. "Not enough, but don't forget yet." 35 years later, those words had guided Benton back to the case. At his funeral, Benton was there. The day was rainless, the Hudson still as glass. She stood by the bank, the place he once called, where it all began, and said softly, "Thank you, Frank. You brought her home." A few weeks later, at Albany headquarters, Benton sat alone in her late-night office. On the desk was the final report, needing her signature before archiving. The bold title, "Case Cleared by DNA, 2011. She picked up the pen, looking out the window where Hudson lights reflected on the black water. 40 years of a case ended in a few ink strokes, but to her, it wasn't just work. It was a journey of those who refused to forget. She set down the pen, adding a small line in the margin, not for anyone to read, but to tell herself and the soul of the woman once buried in silence. 36 years of waiting, justice finally returns. And the Hudson, the river silent too long, finally speaks. Outside, the night wind blew gently, carrying mist from the river's heart. Moonlight faintly lit the Hudson's surface, slow, patient as the time truth had to overcome to be seen. Somewhere, in the lap of waves on the shore, there seemed a faint voice, mingled with the wind, like a thank you. The Hudson still flows, quietly carrying the story of a woman who became a symbol of faith and endurance. And for those who remain, from now on, every time they pass the old fog-shrouded bridge, they'll remember that truth can be buried, but never lost. The story of Elaine Porter reminds us, in today's American life, that justice may come late, but doesn't come alone. It needs human persistence and community discipline. From the $2 million life insurance policy Richard Porter quietly took out before his wife disappeared to the notebook, noting right chest, avoid lungs, and the 1-hour 18-minute gap between 9:30 and 10:48 p.m. Small details painted the portrait of a stager. Practical lesson: with family finances, be transparent on insurance papers, beneficiaries, and reasons for purchase. If there's sudden change, ask and document. For personal safety, especially in marital conflicts, don't overlook signs of control or manipulation. Create a safety plan, safe destinations, emergency numbers, trusted contacts. The Hudson Valley community only awoke when truth surfaced, so don't hesitate to report the unusual gunshots, strange parked cars, someone walking injured but not seeking lit places. On the other hand, technology changed the game. DNA on the woolen scarf and seatbelt spoke for Elaine after 36 years. Preserve files, evidence, photos, messages. What seems trivial today may be tomorrow's key. Finally, the spirit of Frank Cole and Laura Benton reminds us to support budgets for cold case units, volunteer with victim groups, and pursue truth relentlessly. Justice doesn't flow like the Hudson. It flows when we don't let go. Thank you for joining us on this 36-year journey to bring Elaine Porter's truth to light, proof that justice, though late, can still return. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more cold case stories, where the past is awakened once again from the shadows.